Hey there, we're Studio Logics and we are currently working on a 2.5D Souls-like game. So one of the aspects of gaming that I find really interesting is just the simple act of interacting with NPCs. There is a certain vibe to it that honestly I find really hard to explain, but it's definitely something I look forward to when playing a game. So given that fact, we intend to have a substantial amount of NPCs to interact with in the game, to the point that we often consider it a collectible of some sort. But in order to have those interactions be meaningful, the game will need to have a robust and fully functional dialogue system. So here was the process of developing that. The first consideration we made when working on this feature was its visuals, as there were a ton of options to go with in this regard, most of which I think look really good, but we ended up going with a style similar to this. The main reason for picking this style in particular was the fact that it was very simple and minimalist, as well as aesthetically it has a really nice charm to it, reminiscent of classic JRPGs. And with that settled, the second consideration was the fact that the player character will also be a silent protagonist, at least for the most part. So most of the responses the player will be able to choose from will be of the A or B, yes or no, accept or reject type. So with those two settled in mind, I got to work implementing the UI and basic functionality of the dialogue system. First, I made a simple function that checks if the player is within a certain range from the NPC. If so, the NPC then tracks the player's current position and turns to face it when necessary. Then, if the player is facing the NPC within a certain range, a prompt pops up telling the player that they can now interact with the NPC. This was done by placing an invisible box in front of the player, which basically checks if an NPC is within it. If the player chooses to then interact with the NPC, I made a simple dialog box that contains the character portrait as well as a text game object to hold whatever the character has to say. And finally, I had it that a dedicated camera for the dialogue system will be enabled as well, which reduces the FOV and zooms in just to better frame the conversation. So with those implemented, I started working on the dialogue system's actual logic. One thing I learned early on in my game dev journey is the fact that making a dialogue system from scratch can be a very tedious and oftentimes complex process. Especially when considering including branching parts, it can get really cumbersome really fast. So for this system, I made use of two assets that made the process so much easier. The first was a tool known as Ink. It's essentially a free and open source scripting language for text-based adventure games like 80 Days for instance. But to my surprise, it also has a Unity package that integrates it into the engine, which is such a massive W and a huge time saver. Because with that, all I have to do when writing dialogue for a new character is this: make a new ink file, double-click it to open the ink editor, write up all the lines I want the character to say, as well as the possible responses the player could give, and also the different paths that the conversation will go depending on the option that is chosen. After which, I can test the whole conversation within the ink editor itself to see if it's what I want or if I need to iterate on anything. And if it's exactly what I want, I go back to the Unity game engine, wait for it to compile, which usually takes milliseconds, hook it up to a custom dialogue manager script that essentially links the ink file to the UI text game objects. And just like that, I have a fully functional dialogue system that is robust and flexible enough for my needs, which is really cool. So with that out of the way, I decided to add a little bit of polish to this system. So by default, I can add a few things to give the lines the character says some, well, character, by using certain tags to either bolden, increase or decrease the size of the letters, as well as change its color, by basically using Unity's Text Mesh Pro package. But one cool thing I see a lot of indie games do is have the text appear one after the other in this format. And some go as far as altering the speed and timing to give an extra layer of delivery, which I find to be really cool and wanted for this dialogue system. Which is where the second asset comes into play, an asset known as TMP Animated. Developed by Andre from the YouTube channel Mix and Jam alongside William Enders, this script essentially extends the original TMP script to display characters one after the other, as well as a parsing system that allows and checks for custom tags like the speed at which each character should be revealed, or if a character should be paused for a certain amount of time, or even what emotion the NPC should display when saying that particular line, leading to this. For all its worth, I was able to tweak it a bit to allow players skip this animation if they want to. Now, I should note that this is just a functional system with placeholder assets, and we fully intend to add a lot more polish and possibly extend it a bit more just in time for the demo. But I'm really excited at the fact that the system is working seamlessly and within a short amount of time, which honestly just goes to show the power and benefits of using assets and tools in your development process. So to wrap the video up, I'll quickly run through some other features that I've implemented but couldn't really fit into its own video, like the prompt system, which works exactly like the notes in the Soulsborne games. I really like how it is very useful in unintrusively giving the player info on either the game's world or mechanics. Also, I finally implemented a health system for the player, similar to that of Hyperlight Drifter or Zelda, with heart-style containers, as well as the ability to heal by using the available healing flags, though a healing animation will be made really soon. And finally, I worked on a key rebinding system. Right now it's only for controllers, but this is definitely a feature that has been high on my to-do list for a really long while, as I've always seen it as an essential element of gaming for me, so I'm glad to have it fully functional in the game right now. Okay, so as per usual, our indie game highlight for this video is BloodThief. I first stumbled upon this project from this particular video on the developer's channel, and when I asked for a game that you would like me to showcase in this section, one of you mentioned it, so it seemed quite fitting. It's essentially a fast-paced, movement-based first-person action game with a retro aesthetic and vibe to it, which I feel meshes well together, especially since one of its main inspirations is Quake, and I feel that influence, amongst other things, can be felt as its mechanics aim to encourage player creativity as well as a sense of flow, which is always going to be in my good book, and is most likely going to make it really interesting to speedrun. From what I can tell, it has a playtest build available to test out, as well as a Steam page. So if it seems interesting to you, I'll recommend you give it a try and support the developer as well. And with that said, that's the full rundown of some of the features that is in the game so far. I have another video coming up really soon that covers on a lot more features that are more combat oriented, but I want to take my time with that video because it's quite long, currently sitting around 17 or so minutes, hence why I decided to just quickly knock out this video first. All these little features implemented here and there are just coming together towards making the development of the game's demo a lot faster. So hopefully in the coming months, it will be in a state where you all can finally see what we've been up to and hopefully get some feedback from you all as well. As always, massive thanks for checking out the video, as well as to the members of the Logix engine who financially support the studio. Your support is always greatly appreciated. And with that, take care of yourselves and I'll see you in the next one.